In this video, we covered everything from tungsten selection, going over the torch, base metal prep, machine settings. Let's go over to the table and get some welding done. The first weld we're going to do is just a simple butt weld. And if you've noticed, what I did was space my two weld coupons off this table. This is a 1/2 inch thick steel table. If I laid those down right on there, it's going to really pull heat out of the weld joint right where they meet. And it can give you a little problems trying to get the molten puddle and the penetration you need. So I'm just going to space that up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to tack the start and the finish, and then I'm going to get in here and lay a bead down. As before, probably one of the things that will let you be the most successful is being comfortable. If you're in a very awkward position when you're trying to TIG weld because you're using 3 limbs at once, a foot and 2 hands, you're going to be shaky. If you're trying to freehand your torch and your rod, you're going to be all over the map, and wherever that torch goes, it's going to put a weld puddle. So if you're looking for that nice, beautiful, straight stack of dimes weld, you need to be unbelievably consistent and stable. So always practice the movement through the whole weld first, then you know you're clear, start to finish. Your filler rod's not going to hit anything. Your TIG torch is loose enough. All these little things seem like they might be areas to skip and not do, but if you're trying to weld those picture perfect welds, it is all these little steps that are gonna, separate the home DIYer ugly looking weld versus the professional. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's lay a bead down on this and see how it does, and then we'll start talking about the actual procedure of this, and hopefully I can get this camera set up and show you some real close-up action of it. Alright, show you there, show you there. The machine can weld really nice. If you notice the backside though, very little penetration. And I do believe that was largely to do with this table. Even though I got a molten puddle on top, the bottom side of that aluminum was getting all of its heat stripped away. So I want to go ahead, stack this off, and let's keep going, and I'll show you what that penetration on the backside should look like. Alright, so first thing I already noticed from that, I felt like I was getting an approximately the same amount of current, but the weld flattened down, which means it was sinking in more, penetrating a bit more. And I'll show you here, it's really hot, but you could see I was starting to see that penetration come through the backside. So again, that right there shows you that's something you gotta pay attention to. You gotta pay attention to the material you're welding on and how much heat it's pulling away from your part. But not too bad. And as a beginner, don't just try and focus on having a good looking weld. I find a lot of people do that. They're trying to create the perfect looking weld. What you should really be focusing on is a good quality, strong weld. So as a beginner, please, it's something to work towards, making it strong and nice looking, but focus on the penetration and the quality of the weld over the look. All right, with that first piece done, I'm gonna go ahead and try and rig up this GoPro so that you can see, and I wanna walk you through starting the puddle, showing you the texture change. Since aluminum doesn't change colors, it changes textures, and that's the best way I can describe it. Hopefully you can see what I'm talking about, and then we'll go through the step of moving the torch, adding a little filler, letting it blend in, moving, adding, and that's all it is. You just work your way down the joint. We're gonna go ahead, get the arc started. When you're running at low current, you're gonna see the arc's a little bit erratic until you get the current up to a nice operating range, and then your arc will really start to become more stable, and it's gonna wanna go to one side of the part or the other. So we're gonna go ahead, get this arc established, get a puddle established. Sometimes I need to dab a little filler in to help the puddle, but then once we got it there, we're gonna hold that puddle for a second, let the part warm up, and then we're gonna move the puddle along. Alright, I hope you can see that. Starting to get both sides melted a little bit. Dab a little filler in, there we go. Now we have a puddle. And I hope you can hear me over the buzzing, but we can hold that puddle here indefinitely. That is the beautiful thing about TIG welding. I can back that current off, and you'll see the texture start to solidify, or I can bring that current back in. We'll get that puddle. And if you can see what I mean, it's a texture change. Now we have a little bit of a keyhole happening. We're going to go ahead, dab it in, and then move over a little bit. We're going to let both sides melt in, keyhole, and dab it. And that is basically all we're going to keep doing. You want to watch that material flow in, and you're just adding enough filler to help the puddle. There we go. So we move over about 1/8 of an inch, form a new puddle, dab some filler. And you can see there, I hope, I didn't crater fill. We wound up getting a pretty good crater. Okay, I'll talk you through this part here. So that was the beginning. Again, not real uniform. I was concentrating on talking more than I was welding, but we crater filled that first bead, and I didn't crater fill the second bead. And that crater, ow, that's really hot. The reason you want to crater fill is if you leave a crater there, that is a great spot for a crack to form. So you want to ramp down your current a little slowly with your foot pedal and dab just a little filler and fill that crater in. And as you can see here, we were getting wonderful penetration, and I know it doesn't look, it looks like two separate kind of pieces still, but that's only because the backside wasn't wire brush. So that oxide layer is making it look like it doesn't really want to fuse together, but that is 100% penetration right there. Okay, now that I've demonstrated establishing a weld puddle, holding the puddle, letting it keyhole penetrate, dabbing some filler in, and moving that weld puddle along, I think that gives you the idea of doing a bead yourselves. So let's get into playing with some machine settings and seeing the results. I think one of the first settings we should play with here on this coupon is balance. I'm going to show you either extreme. Let's turn balance way down, very little cleaning action, and then let's turn it way up and let's see the results. Hopefully we can see the etching differences on the cleaning action, and then I'm most likely going to burn this tungsten up. So let's go ahead and do that and see the results. Okay, for this first demonstration here, let's go to balance and let's turn that down to 10. So right away I'm noticing a little bit more contaminant on top of the weld bead here. And I can also feel with my foot pedal that it's taking much less current to operate. Okay. That was not very pretty. Now let's set balance to 30%. We'll put a nice bead in the center and then we'll go real high. %'s a nice setting. Let's test that out. The other thing I'm noticing is that tungsten now has no discoloration on it. So because we're using a really low balance and putting a lot of heat into the workpiece and not the tungsten, our post-gas flow is probably more than we need now, but it's keeping our tungsten from getting contaminated. All right, let's start a new bead and try this out. All right, so right away I can tell that bead is shinier. There is a lot less contaminant floating on the top. Significant difference. Okay, let's turn it up even higher. Let's go to 50%, which 50% for a material like this is really, really high, but I want to show you. Oh, I can hear the difference. Oh yeah, I'm needing much more current. The tungsten is balling up more than it ever has, because again, I'm putting way more heat into the tungsten. So it's probably a hard thing to show here, but that tungsten got a lot hotter. It actually balled up really nicely, but I probably would need more post-gas flow. All right, now that we got that first test done with the balance, let's take a look at the results here. As you can see, we're running with 10% balance, and that is not what I would be looking for. The etching zone around the weld is almost non-existent, which happens from cleaning the positive half cycle. There's a lot of contaminants, as you can see, on top of the weld puddle itself, because they weren't getting removed, they were merely just floating up to the surface. So 10% with this material is too low for my liking, so I don't like that. 30%, as you can see, there's a bit of a difference here. You see that white etching zone? That is the cleaning action taking place, and I'm quite happy with that. For what I do, I'm usually not worried about too much cleaning. I'm usually welding to get, a good weld, and also make it pretty. Now, mind you, these aren't the nicest welds in the world. My comfort level isn't as high as it would be because I'm trying to talk and video and do different things, but we're not really trying to look at the prettiness of this weld. We're trying to look at the difference that balance has. So as you can see, lots of nice cleaning action comes in. The actual weld itself gets rid of all of this black contaminant. The cleaning action got rid of that for us. I have more cleaning action to the top, which could be related to my torch angle. I probably should have my torch tipped towards myself a little bit more, which would have brought the arc and the cleaning action to the bottom, but it is still there and I'm happy with that. 30% is a nice, no pun intended, but balance between putting heat into the part and getting enough required cleaning. Now here is 50%, and the balance does go higher than that. The actual effective cleaning zone didn't get much larger, so I think we were probably maxed out to the shielding gas coverage we had. If you wanted this etching to come out even farther, like out to here, which there's not really a big reason to, the cleaning action will only take place inside of the argon shielding gas. So I probably didn't have much gas coming down over here because of the size of the nozzle I was using. So that just shows you how nozzle size does play a role in cleaning action. But effectively, between weld to weld, there isn't a lot of difference. I didn't really crater fill this, so you can see that little hole there is the crater we're talking about when you finish a weld. The best way to fill that is to slowly ramp down the current with your foot pedal while giving it just a little bit of an extra dab of filler rod at the end. Let the puddle fill in, because that little crater there can very easily lead to a crack migrating down the weld. And here I did crater fill it. So there's a little bit of a difference. I hope that explains what balance is and the effect of adjusting that balance. I think the next thing to show you is let's look at frequency. I don't really adjust frequency a lot. Like I said, I usually run between 85 to 100 hertz, but just as a nice thing to show you, let's do the same thing as the balance. I'm gonna start really low, I'm gonna go to where I like it, and then I'm gonna go really high. I'm gonna go ahead, do all three of those. I'm not gonna try videoing a close-up. I'm not sure you're gonna see any difference happening there, but I'll get those 3 beads laid and then I'll bring you back in and let's look at the effective difference between those settings. Let's get some welding done and I'm gonna play with the frequency or the hertz. Okay, here's the coupon that we were playing with frequency. As I thought, and it's hard to show you here, there's very little difference in the look of these welds. Penetration varied. I wasn't really paying too much attention to that, so I can't really, you know, make a comment on penetration versus frequency. But what you could really tell was the sound. 50, 100, and 200 hertz. You could definitely hear the difference in those welds. And my understanding is that as you go to higher frequency, that allows you to weld on thinner materials. You get more cleaning cycles, and it should penetrate a little bit better. All right, well, I showed you what changing the frequency did there. Really, you could hear the difference between 50, 100, and 200 hertz. If you do any research on adjusting the frequency when AC TIG welding, it really has to do with adjusting your arc and the width of your puddle and everything like that. I didn't see a ton of that happen here, but that is what frequency adjustment is for. A lower frequency like 50 hertz is going to create more heat into your part. The arc widens out. And as you go to higher frequencies, it's gonna really tighten that arc up, bring it much into a tighter bead. And so if you're trying to weld some really thin material, you're probably gonna be going to a higher frequency. But there's the reason they say, you know, 85 to 100 hertz is really where you wanna be most of the time. And as a beginner, just set it there and don't think too much about that. Frequency is not a setting you're gonna need to adjust very much. Then another thing we'll get into after this is playing with the pulse settings, because this is a AC/DC TIG, but also AC/DC pulse TIG, which means when you're welding that puddle, it's not gonna be just a steady arc. It's gonna cycle on and then back off to a really low current just to maintain the arc, and then pulse, go up to operating current and pull back. Go up to operating current and pull back. And the idea of that is to limit how much heat you're putting into your base material. And this can be critical. If you're welding on some components that you really don't want to overheat because it might warp the part or disfigure the shape or something like that, pulse welding lets you get the penetration and the weld completed with as little heat into the base material as possible. Usually it would be something you use when you're trying to weld thin metals and lay a bead on a really, really thin piece of aluminum, because you're not putting any extra heat in. It's not something I do a lot of. Pulse settings are really simple. The only thing to it is the pulses per minute that you're gonna have. And when you're running a pulse with a TIG, just talk about it now, it's gonna pulse on, and when it's pulsed on, you dab your filler rod when it's real hot, and then the pulse is gonna back off, and that's when you move the torch. And then the pulse comes on, brings that puddle back to life, you'll dab in your filler rod, and then the pulse comes off, and it's just a process. Really, the pulse sets the rhythm for the weld, because you're only gonna add filler rod when the pulse is on, and you move when it backs off to the low current. Let's set this up for pulses. You do it by pushing and holding the center knob to set up pulse control. I1 is our welding current, which we will control with the foot pedal. I2, sorry, set that back to 180. I2 is our resting current, and pulse hertz, that is going to be our pulses per second. Now they represent it as hertz. I've always heard it as pulses per second, so you want, 1 pulse a second, 2 pulse a second, but let's just go ahead and leave it set at half. I think it's going to be quite low. We're probably going to have to turn that up, but let's just play with it and we'll learn together. Okay, with our coupon ready to go and pulse settings enabled at 0.5 hertz, let's see how many pulses a second that's going to be. I suspect that's going to be a little low for the speed I like to weld with, but it really comes down to how fast you can move. The idea, again, with pulse welding is to allow for minimal heat to be put into the part, but to achieve the weld you're looking for. Usually used on thinner materials, but it's not limited to thinner materials. Pulse welding isn't really something I do a lot of because I'm usually welding between maybe 60 thou to 3/16, and I've just never really felt the need to use it because I usually do most of the control with the foot pedal myself, but I know people have been asking about it. It really doesn't change much from regular AC TIG welding. The only idea is that the welder itself pulses to weld and then pulls back to a maintain current, holding the arc so that you can move, and then pulse to weld, pull back to maintain, you move. So you're only welding on the hits of current. So I'm just gonna draw an arc and hold it, and I wanna see the rhythm that the pulses are developing for me. I think it's gonna be a little low and I'm gonna need to turn it up. Well, I'm not always right. That was actually a really good rhythm for me. Like I said, I don't do pulse welding a lot, so I'm used to setting my own rhythm or taking the time I need during a weld to move myself around. But for the first time really ever spending much time pulse welding, I'm pretty happy with that. It started off a little cool, but it really allows you to stack that bead in there. And I mean, I got a lot of heat in the part. Let's show you here. So you can see in here, again, I'm not an expert at pulse welding, but it really allowed those beads to stack up nicely. And if we look at the backside, it was a little cool there, but it really started penetrating and coming into its own. So I'm really happy with that. Let's lay another bead down. Let's pick up the pulses and see if I can match. And again, the idea is you're only feeding material when it's at operating current. When it pulls back, you shouldn't be trying to feed anything in. You should be moving the torch and letting it pulse again. Okay, let's turn that up to 0.8 hertz.
I'd like to make a comment here that hertz is pulses per second. It's just another way of explaining it. So at 0.5, you're dealing with 1 pulse every 2 seconds or half a pulse a second. And at 1 hertz, it would be a pulse every second. So right now I am running at 0.8 pulses a second.
That's pretty good. That definitely picked up the pace for me. It sets the tone to move the torch, feed the rod, move the torch, feed the rod. I probably couldn't go much faster than that. Penetration is really nice here. I'll bring it in to show you. But I just don't feel the need to use those settings. I can do most of this with just controlling the foot pedal myself, but if this is a thing you want to look into, ow, that's hot. It's really just something you're gonna need to play with and find your own pace.
When you take a closer look at the coupons here for pulse settings, it really shows how much nicer using pulse can stack up the beads. By allowing you to travel with low current, you tend to not wash out the bead, and you can really stack it up. And when you look over to the backside, I was really impressed with the penetration as well. It seems that ramping up to that weld current really helps to dig in. So I was quite impressed actually using pulse, more than I thought.
All right, it's kind of fitting that I have 2 coupons left, and there was one thing I forgot to cover. Let's go through it right now, and that's gonna be like simulating a lack of gas flow, because that's probably gonna be one of the biggest things as an amateur welder that you're probably gonna fight, either contaminated gas or not having the correct gas flow, because that gas is extremely important to create a coverage over your part, because you want that arc and the molten aluminum to completely be in an inert environment, meaning no oxygen, no contaminants. It needs to happen inside an inert gas like argon. So I'm gonna prep these up, fire the welder back up, and let's dial that gas back to low and see what happens. Okay, I have got this gas turned down, and let's see what kind of quality of weld it gives us. Did you see that? Burnt right up. That was not enough gas flow at all. Okay, so there we go. Here I laid down a bead for comparison with approximately 12 to 15 CFH because I'm using a number 6 nozzle. In the center, I dialed that back, but it was next to nothing, and it burnt up the tungsten and spit it out and created a lot of black soot. So then I turned up the gas just a little bit more, and you can see what happens here. It melts the material, but it has no cleaning action really, because there's atmosphere pouring in, and it's just gonna create a completely sooty, it's just gross. So if you're getting welds that have a lot of soot in them, or just don't seem to have good arc control, or your tungsten is turning black and burning up, you probably have a gas issue and contaminants getting into your arc or weld zone. All right, well, I hope you've gotten enough information out of there to get out and start practicing some of this yourself. It's really not that hard. It just takes some time and experience. Don't be worried about screwing anything up. Tungstens aren't that expensive. Get yourself a good consumable kit. You're really not gonna hurt the machine itself. The biggest thing, the biggest takeaway in this video, I hope you will realize, is cleanliness. Aluminum needs to be clean, clean, and clean. Have a dedicated wire brush, wipe down with acetone, use a clean pair of gloves. If you can do all that prep well, you're setting yourself up for success. Everything else is just gonna be playing with settings, getting comfortable, which is probably number 2, being comfortable. Yeah, I think that's about it. If you wanna see any other aspects of this that I forgot to cover, I think I covered most things. Just drop a comment. I'm always up for doing a follow-up video, and yeah, get out there and play. That's all any of this is, and you'll get better, trust me. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you in the next one.